William Gibson's Neuromancer is one of the best and most influential science fiction novels of the 20th century. This was the book that ushered in the cyberpunk movement, impacting not just science fiction literature, but also movies, television, comic books, and video games. As famous and respected as Neuromancer is, it's never been successfully adapted into a film, in spite of many, many efforts. From psychedelic guru Timothy Leary, to cult sci-fi director Vincenzo Natali, to the guy behind those freaky Aphex Twin music videos, this story, like the book itself, involves some very surprising and unlikely characters. This is the production history of William Gibson's Neuromancer. Neuromancer may not have been the first cyberpunk story, but it's probably the most important. Along with Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, it's one of the genre's two main creative wellsprings. Originally published in 1984 as a humble $3 paperback, the book's arrival was not highly anticipated nor widely covered. William Gibson was an obscure first-time novelist, part of an emerging underground movement of sci-fi authors working to infuse the genre with a new punk rock sensibility. The style they pioneered, cyberpunk, would find its first popular literary breakthrough with Neuromancer. A visionary and stylistic tour de force, the novel told the moody and noir-infused story of a burnt-out hacker named Case, hired by shady figures to plan a dangerous heist involving super-advanced AI constructs. Written with paranoid urgency and melancholic depth, the plot made for an arresting thriller, but much more impactful was the book's powerfully evocative setting. Gibson imagined a gritty and grimy world transformed by technology. Data was the ultimate currency, the method of trade a vast computer-linked network called the Matrix. Neuromancer was grappling with concepts years ahead of its time. Some of its ideas may come off as more charming than revelatory for today's readers, but that's only because we now arguably inhabit the world it predicted. Gibson was basically envisioning the modern version of the internet long before it actually existed. He even coined a term for it: cyberspace. Neuromancer galvanized the science fiction community and swept every major sci-fi literary award of that year: the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Philip K. Dick Award. Its world and tone were so prescient and so fully realized, it essentially laid the template for nearly every cyberpunk work that followed. It's impossible to imagine movies like Ghost in the Shell and The Matrix, or video games like Deus Ex and Perfect Dark, without Neuromancer. Even the more offbeat cyberpunk creations like Gattaca and Code 46 explore core thematic concepts that owe at least part of their inspiration to Gibson's novel. But most of these creative offspring would not begin to appear until well after Neuromancer's publication. Cyberpunk was slow to find its way into the popular mainstream. A bit like Lovecraft, whom I covered in my previous series, Gibson was an innovative and original voice whose style just didn't seem to easily translate. The early history of Neuromancer's stalled journey to the screen has got to be one of the strangest I've ever encountered. The information is a little fragmentary, but here's everything I could piece together. In the late 80s, William Gibson was fast becoming something of a rock star in his field. Neuromancer was followed by Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive, both set in the same universe but focusing on different characters, and the trilogy's kinetic and highly visual style began to attract the attention of Hollywood. Gibson started receiving screenwriting offers, leading to the author's secondary career as a frustrated screenwriter. He worked on several unproduced scripts, perhaps most famously a now widely admired early draft of Alien 3, quite a bit different from the version eventually filmed by David Fincher in 1992. The Neuromancer film went into development as early as 1986, but instead of the conventional studio development deal, Gibson sold the rights to a small production team called Cabana Boy Entertainment. The story of this company's brief lifespan is a rather fascinating odyssey. According to a 2016 blog entry on the Digital Antiquarian, Cabana Boy Entertainment started when two actual Cabana Boys, apparently former employees of the Beverly Hills Hotel, decided to make a sequel to their favorite movie of all time, 80s cult classic The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. Neither of them had any filmmaking experience, but they managed to bankroll the enterprise enterprise by teaming with the wife of a wealthy plastic surgeon. Although they were able to convince Buckaroo Banzai screenwriter Earl Mac Rauch to commit, they weren't able to raise much interest in the sequel. The team switched focus to Gibson's Neuromancer for reasons that aren't entirely clear, and somehow talked the author into selling them the screen rights. Rauch remained in place as their screenwriter, Gibson agreed to lend the team his support, and unbelievably, countercultural icon Timothy Leary joined as a creative consultant. This whole improbable venture resulted in a 1986 promotional video pitching the film to potential investors, which surfaced online a few years back. And just as improbably, it led to what is sometimes described as one of the best PC games of the era. Timothy Leary was actually an early proponent for video games. Part of his commitment to the production involved putting together the film's video game adaptation, originally planned for simultaneous release with the movie. Leary's initial vision for the Neuromancer game was said to be quite ambitious. Devo was going to create the musical score, William S. Burroughs was involved as a writer, and David Byrne and Grace Jones were set to appear as in-game characters. Eventually, these plans had to be scaled back. Leary managed to get a more modest version of the game published by Interplay in 1988. It's not particularly well remembered today, but occasionally it does turn up on lists of the greatest games of all time. The movie, unfortunately, would not be so lucky. Cabana Boy Entertainment apparently became somewhat notorious around Hollywood, due to their lack of experience, alleged delusions of grandeur, and a developing behind-the-scenes drama. Around 1987, the company finally began to implode. The original founders departed, the wife of the plastic surgeon was left in charge, and she continued trying to sell the film on her own. She wound up doing a pretty good job. A screenplay was apparently copyrighted in 1988, then, against all odds, a contract was signed with TriStar Pictures in 1989. But that's as far as the production ever got. Cabana Boy Entertainment was dissolved in 1993, and the rights to the book reverted back to Gibson. Neuromancer's subsequent movie deals would not turn out to be quite so fascinating or colorful, but the project still had an unusual journey ahead of it.